All right, let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar brought to you by NetSPI. If you're here, you're likely wondering what the secret is to building an effective security program. And according to our panelists and healthcare industry security leaders, Chad Peterson and Phil Morris, it's all about establishing trust and keeping it. If at any point in this conversation you have a question for Chad or Phil, please submit it in the GoToWebinar portal and they will connect with you via email after the discussion has concluded. Without further ado, I'll hand it off to you, Chad, to kick off introductions and get us started.
Excellent. Thank you, Tori. As mentioned, my name is Chad Peterson. I'm a managing director here at NetSPI. Been in the industry for a greater part of a quarter of a century. And during that time, I've really done everything from the hands-on keyboard to even running cables all the way up through a good time in the building programs, auditing. I'm actually a former healthcare and HIPAA auditor, as well as a former PCI auditor as well. But really found a lot of my love in the area of building programs, maturing programs, and really working policy procedure, GRC side of things. But spent time also as a security leader within a health system in Central Florida. But really looking forward to the opportunity to talk to you today about building trust and keeping it with my partner, Phil. Phil?
Hey, Chad, thanks for that. Great introduction. Like Chad, I've been in the business for a while. Unlike Chad, I moved quickly away from hardware to the software realm. My raceways and cable days are way behind me, thank goodness. I specialize mostly in risk management these days. I'm looking a lot at ethical AI because that's going to be something I'll be talking about for probably the rest of our lives. Strangely enough, my background is in organizational psychology and complexity science. I came into software engineering kind of on the side, like many of us do, but I've been doing it for a while. I really enjoy it, and I spend most of my time working with companies and partners building out risk management and risk assessment programs.
Awesome. So let's go ahead and jump into it, Phil. Start off and talk a little bit about what is trust. So
sure, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to let you get started.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chad. So let's start talking with some definitions. When we talk about trust, what is trust? Trust is saying to your partners or your colleagues or your senior management that we have shared values and we have a shared vision. So the underlying theme of everything we're going to talk about today is that you can't do this alone. Security, healthcare is a complex, collaborative business, and establishing trust will be important for your career and important for all the projects you work on going forward. Today, we're going to start by giving you a brief introduction to a framework called the Cynefin framework that I use to help understand what different types of problems we're wrestling with. You can see it displayed here. This framework was designed by Dr. David Snowden a long time ago when he was working with IBM Global Services, and it's evolved over years to be one of the leading frameworks to understand how you can understand what roles you're living with, what sort of problem you're dealing with, and how to respond to the situations you see there. So let's walk through this quickly, and then I'll explain why this is important. On the lower left side of the screen, you see the word chaos. If you're in the chaos domain, then anything you do is important. Do something, get out of that situation, and then evaluate what your options are. The common example is if the house is on fire, get everybody out of the house, then work through the next steps. On the lower right side, you see the word simple. In the simple domain, there are established best practices that you can follow to solve the problem. There's an easy connection, Dr. Snowden would say, to see between the cause and the effect that you need to get the outcome that you want. A lot of command and conquer, command and control management schemes work in this space. Micromanagers work in this space. And it's because we as humans have evolved to work in this space. When you see something that orange with stripes in the grass, that's probably a tiger. So the simple answer is be aware of it and get away from it. However, in security, the way the world's evolved over time, now we're looking more and more at living in the complicated space. And that's a bit uncomfortable for us. In the complicated space, there are good practices to follow, but not one best practice. See, if you're in the complicated space, The right way to approach this is to sense what your options are, analyze perspectives, and then respond and course correct over time. A lot of agile methodologies are based on operating in the complicated space where you don't quite know the outcome you're shooting for yet, but you can sense where you need to go. So you do some work, you respond and course correct and go from there. A lot of the work that we do in security is complicated. But most of the work that we do in healthcare, and almost all the work we do in security as well, is in the complex realm. In the complex realm, unfortunately, everything is very connected. There's a lot of fluid boundaries. There's a lot of vagueness in this. And we as humans have evolved not to like that type of a domain. We want things to be simple. The hardest projects I've worked on is with senior leadership, where we're trying to establish trust and credibility, and we're in a complex space. I can see that, but they can't. They see it as something simple. I've trained my teams over time to be aware of the word just. If you hear someone saying, it's just an open port on the firewall, or we're just using TLS 1.0 for this one project, be aware that's somebody who's looking at things from a very simple perspective. And it's important to your credibility. It's important to establishing trust for you as a subject matter expert to help them understand that they're responding to the situation in a way that isn't really going to give them the outcome they want. If you're in the complex space, you have to experiment. You have to try some things, because what works for one company doesn't work for the other. What works for Amazon won't work for a hospital down the street. You have to approach a problem from the perspective of, let's probe for options and see what emerges as a best practice that we can adopt over time. And as we're going to talk about later in the presentation, once you've discovered what that approach could be, you need to monitor and evolve it as well, because the situations are very fluid and they'll change over time as well. All right, so with Cynefin as a framework for understanding how everybody needs to be on the same page, it's important to you as a subject matter expert or as an IT professional or even a senior manager to recognize when the other people that you're working with may not see the world from that perspective. So now let's talk about how you can use this framework to build on some common good practices to establish trust in the business. The first requirement for establishing trust is you have to understand the business you're operating in. So let's explore some details around that a bit more. The first step is you've got to know your products and services. Chad, I know you as well, you've seen this as well. Organizations over the course of time have evolved to build silos. And I don't know how many times I've worked with a product team or a managed service team member or someone who only sees the world from the perspective of the silo that they're operating in. If you're going to establish trust and if you're going to build your presence and your credibility as an executive, you have to know more than what's inside your silo or your sandbox. Know your products, know your services, learn your markets and what your competitors are doing in those markets, because your executives and your senior IT partners are going to need to know how to respond to those types of competitive forces as they evolve throughout the business. And then finally, clarify what your priorities and processes are and know who owns them. We're going to talk a bit shortly about how much collaboration is important with regard to establishing trust and being able to clarify what your priorities are and then talk about them in a way that people can understand easily is going to be very, very important. Let's shift and talk about that for a moment. So the second requirement would be speaking the language of the executives. Let me show you what I mean by that. When I talk about speaking the language of the executives, recognize that senior executives are looking at the business from the context of risk postures and options for differentiation or options for managing and leveraging resources. They're sharing with you priorities and what the risk tolerance is for managing those types of priorities. And those go down to mid-level managers or other operators who from there take it down to the implementation and operations teams. If you're used to talking about things like the number of CVEs that your SOC, that your vulnerabilities are identifying rather, or the number of messages that your SOC are seeing every day, that's not something that translates easily to the type of language that your senior executives and the people you're trying to establish trust with can easily understand. You need to be able to speak about things in concept of risk. And if you're talking about shared vision, and if you're talking about shared values, you need to talk about risks and challenges to those risks or exploits that could damage that risk in the context of those values and that vision. It's okay to have technical knowledge. It's okay to understand what the priorities are and the frameworks and the policies at a detailed level. But when you're working with different levels of executives in a complex organization, you need to be able to shift and speak different dialects of the business according to what sort of audience you're speaking to. This really breaks down to know your audience and be able to speak in the context that they'll understand things easily. I am surprised how many times I've seen people present to the board or to senior executives, and it's all technical and there's no context around it. And they work through the data as fast as they can, and then they stop and they just wait for some sort of vision to come from the board or something like that. That's not the way to work, and that will really damage your credibility, and you will have no trust going forward if you approach problems from that perspective. So now let's talk
Great
about,
points, Bill. Great points.
Thanks, Chad. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. Now let's talk about how you can engage with these people, speaking the right language, and and work to become a good negotiator. So when I talk about being a good negotiator, you have to know your style, and you have to know the style negotiation with others. A lot of times in negotiation, we picture the used car salesman or the executive who's like always be closing. That's not the way negotiation works anymore. In a complex environment, you need to think in the context of style, because you need to be able to put things in a way that people understand and respond to the give and take that happens through a negotiation. This is important. I'm doing this negotiation right now with my board in the context of risk tolerance. And I have different personalities that operate under different negotiation styles that I have to be responsive to and be aware of. Because if I'm not able to be a bit chameleon in how I approach some of these topics, we're not going to get to a shared outcome that's going to be positive for us. So let's talk about what those three negotiation styles are. And this comes from work done by Chris Voss, who's written one of probably the best book on negotiation I've ever read, called Never Split the Difference. He identifies three types of negotiators. The first is called the analyst. You know you're negotiating with an analyst when they're very prepared. They have their data, they have their spreadsheets. And an important thing about knowing with an analyst is that they value that data very much. They're hesitant to give up things in negotiation. I'm not sure I want my team to do that because I have this data to support that. They like to use that data, so you have to use it as well. When you're working with an analyst to help build credibility, you have to have data to support your perspective on things. However, analysts struggle working with another type of negotiation style called the assertive. If you're working with an assertive personality, they like direct communication. I'm from New York, so I have some aspects of an assertive personality. I like direct communication. Someone working from an assertive perspective, they demand respect, and they're only going to give up something if they can get something more in value. This is your typical stereotype of a CEO, for example. Time is important. Time is valuable. Energy and attention is valuable. So let's work through this problem quickly because we have other things we need to move on to. As I said, their weakest pairing, the weakest way to approach an assertive negotiation style as an analyst, because they get bogged down with all the data. To an analyst, the data is the most important thing. To an assertive one, it's getting to the end goal is the most important thing to be aware of. So when you're trying to build credibility with your executives or other personalities, recognize that an assertive personality likes that direct communication and demands that respect. So you work with them from that perspective as well. Now, my negotiation style is an accommodator. An accommodator focuses on a win-win. I know a lot of data can be wrong. I worked with data a lot. It can be manipulated. It can be changed. I don't necessarily trust data just because it's on a spreadsheet. What's important for me as an accommodator is that we're talking. So when I'm talking to my board, when I'm talking to my executives or partners, the important thing is to make sure that we're sharing ideas and working toward an outcome that we're all clear on. Those shared values and shared vision are very, very important. The weakest type of approach with an accommodator, funny enough, is another accommodator, because in the interest of trying to preserve the relationship and making sure we're working toward things, we can get bogged down and not focus on some of the direct communication and data that the other two styles require. Knowing your negotiation style and knowing the negotiation style of the people you're working with will help you build that credibility. If you know the business, if you know the market, and you know how to engage with these types of personalities in a way that helps you establish those shared outcomes, then you're building credibility and you can be seen as the problem solver or the go-to person to help you no matter what sort of complex or complicated domain you're working in. The final point I want to wrap up with and this is something I know Chad and I are going to talk about a bit as we go forward, is you need to be a collaborator, not a hero. If you're in security or you're in healthcare and you see yourself as the cowboy or the hero or the lone wolf who's going to save the day, you're going to be in for a big disappointment. That's not the way the world works anymore. It is too complex. Heck, it's even too complicated most of the time. So if you're going to establish trust, be seen as a collaborator, be seen as somebody who won't be an obstacle to moving things forward. Be seen as somebody who can be somebody that you want to work with to establish a problem, and you'll have no problems establishing your credibility from that point forward.
That's a great point, and I think that this really, solidifies, and it's like the title of this slide says, you be that bridge builder, and I think that is, you're spot on, Phil. That's something that we have run into historically as security professionals. I'm here to save the world. I'm here to be that cowboy, and it's no longer functioning. So that's great.
And
So.
Chad, can I,
Mhm.
I'm sorry, one more point I want to bring.
Sure.
I apologize for this, but I want to get to your material as well. There's a lot of research that says in a crisis situation, the people who build the bridges are the ones who really help solve the problems. And that's what this slide is kind of speaking to here. I know people like org charts. I know people like to have a command and control approach to the business, for example. When crisis hits, that is not necessarily the way to work through a problem. I'm in security, you're in security. We speak to all aspects of the business, not just the silos that we're working in. And being able, it's fairly common for me to take a situation and from there jump over to talk to another business and say, this is what these guys are doing. They're in a silo. They didn't know what the other team was doing, and helping build that collaboration and share those good or best practices across the community is really, I think, an obligation we have as security professionals.
Agree. So, how do we, what I want to go into is how do we take that, the knowledge that Phil just shared, great stuff, but how do we bring that into our day to day, and how do we build that trust and understanding and break down those silos? And really, one of the easiest ways to do it is to build champions in key business areas across your organization. Now, looks great on paper. It's a great bullet point, but how do you do it? And it really boils down to a lot of the points that Phil brought up in the first part of today's discussion, and that is, it's communication, it's talking, it's building that trust. So how do you do it? And the key is, in order to break a silo, you need to build the bridge. And what I mean by that, and really how we tie that together, is when you're building champions and you want to spread security throughout the org, you can't just sit in the IT department. You need to build champions and to understand what the security needs of the organization are in areas outside of IT. So in all the business functions and all the areas. So the way to do that is get out and meet them. So you want to develop security champions in each of the areas, not just within IT. So the easiest way for us to think about in the healthcare industry is where it's important to build this trust and where it's important to understand and get these champions, follow the data. So understand anywhere where PHI is collected and handled, and get a better understanding of each of those groups and each of those areas. So that's moving to that second bullet point of really understanding the business needs. The more you understand, the more you can identify, and that's how you start to build the trust. And ways to build that trust and ways to understand the business is to go through and talk to people, sit down. I've done this in organizations when we sat down and we were looking at processes and what's working. And one of the best ways I've found to find trust is to build trust is to sit down and understand the processes. So I'll sit with a group who does patient intake, understand how they're collecting information, what they're then doing with that information, and following that path along. And I'll actually follow that info from department to department and really understand how it's being used. But as I'm doing that, I am understanding a little bit more about the processes that's happening, how the business is using things, and understand what they're doing. Now, a key thing to remember here, just like Phil talked about whether the different negotiation styles, use those negotiation styles also as ways to communicate with other groups. It's not just talking up to our leadership, it's also talking down. And not talking down to someone, you know what I mean there, but talking down the chain. But the bottom line is it's communication, talking on the same level. If you are talking to an analyst, talk like an analyst. If you are dealing with an assertive type, an accommodator, know how to best communicate and be the right one as well. So you not only have to understand who you're talking to, but be able to be adaptive and use the right tones, the right communication to have that conversation to start to build that trust. Now, the next point is once you've built these champions, and you're really building it by the joint understanding. You will find that the more you understand and put yourself in someone else's shoes, they're going to reciprocate. They also want to understand, why is security concerned with how I'm doing this portion of the job? And it's really that ability then, as soon as they start asking questions, and it's that communication back and forth and understanding the goals of both sides, the business side, the regulatory side, so the security aspect and how they need to mesh together. Once you've built them, you need to have regular touch points. And this is important. It's building that initial trust and then keeping the trust through communication. And it's having the regular touch points of as things change, whether they're on the business side, you hope that you build a relationship where, hey, these processes have changed. We're doing this now. Do you see any security issues with that? I mean, we never used to hear that. But once you start to build this relationship, it goes both ways. It's not security driving policy down, it's business processes changed. How does this affect security? And once you get to that point with these security champions, you're going to be on the right path to success when it comes to securing an organization and building that whole process within the business process. So it's no longer security business, they're together and you're doing business securely. Now, one of the biggest pitfalls you're going to run into here, and it's a pitfall that's it's a pitfall if you don't follow it. And really, what I mean by the pitfall is going through all this process and then doing nothing with it. So you need to continue this process. It's a relationship that needs to continue to be nurtured and fed, and it's utilizing the champions in maybe how you're doing onboarding, how you're doing your security awareness programs. Security Awareness Month is a great one. You bring the champions from the different areas and leverage them. Same point in time is you want to interact also with the business and ask for input. Okay, so get them involved in the program, get them involved in the conversations as you're looking to roll out maybe a new security process, like you want to roll out additional factors of multi-factor authentication or something like that. How is this going to affect the business? What's the downsides if I do this? Do you see any roadblocks or obstacles that's going to cause the business by doing this? And then that's going to start that conversation of, oh, I didn't think of that. Well, maybe if we do it this way. So that's the thing you want to be able to build and nurture. So I guess when we look at this developing, and I think Phil and I, let's break this apart. Do you want to talk a little bit maybe about KPIs and how we can kind of build that together? Again, this is that reinforcement of we built that trust with the business. We want to work together. What's the most effective way to do that?
Sure, I'll try to talk about a couple of points. Thanks, Chad. Similar to what you just mentioned about pitfalls with security champion programs, for example, I have used KPIs and OKRs in the past in a lot of interesting ways. The important thing about them is that they're always evolving. You can develop some KPIs and then share them with the business, usually through Security Champions program or through the executive management, top down, bottom up. Lots of ways to get the message out there to identify your security priorities and what everyone should be working on. But besides just sharing them, you need to maintain them, because in a complex space, the world is the sand, as they say, is shifting under our feet. Prior to November 2022, there wasn't a lot of conversation really going on in the center of the business with regard to what AI was going to happen with, or ethical AI, or privacy around AI. But with Chat GPT 3 and 4 and all the other different versions that are coming out now, suddenly compliance and privacy are really the center of the conversation. So you need to be able to evolve your KPIs and OKRs and really understand how the business is shifting under your feet. It is very much a collaboration. We've got a note here on proxy metrics. And Chad, the security world is full of proxy metrics. If I see one more list that says we have 40,000 vulnerabilities of X, Y, or Z, I don't know what I'm going to do. It doesn't mean anything to anybody. What are you doing about those vulnerabilities? How much risk are they introducing into the business? Those are the important things you want to focus on.
That's great. And I think tying back to the business, everybody wants to know, well, what framework do I follow from a security point of view? And the thing I like to talk about when and again, I'm going to be a broken record here, but even when you look at a framework is a guideline, and it really allows us to look beyond just the compliance, the regulatory. We all know that the HIPAA sets a state of things we should do, things we need to protect, but it doesn't really give you the how. And that's where frameworks are important. But when you find a framework that you're going to look at, whether it's ISO, whether it's NIST CSF, when you look at those components, the thing you need to remember, and I think that's very important in order to have a program that is going to adjust to those shifting sands that you talked about, is that framework needs to be tailored to your org. In other words, it needs to still fit the process. So you use the guideline, you use that map, if you will, to build a foundation, but then interweave your business processes in there. So you're actually working with, all right, this is what needs to be done. This is a way to do it. This is the way it's really going to work well in our organization, and then stick with those. And really, as it goes, you want to tie everything back to the business.
I agree. And I'm a big fan of maturity models. I think that's how you grow your security program around maturity models. Chad, you and I both ride motorcycles, and I'm bringing that up because I see a framework not as a list of rules, thou shalt do only this. I mean, okay. But if you ride a motorcycle, then there's 3 common areas in the road, in the lane, that you stay between. You stay between the guardrails, right? So I think of frameworks in terms of guardrails, and you can ride on the road wherever it's appropriate, left or right or whatever. But let's stay on the path here and use these controls and frameworks to help you keep moving in the right direction.
Yep. So I think overall, when you look at it, and whether it's a framework, whether it's KPIs, as long as they're all tied to the organizational need. But the bottom line, that the best practices I look at is it's a continuous process. You don't want to rely on just the basics. They should the best practice. That one, I always had to put a statement, a DUS statement, if you will. Don't rely on default configurations. Obviously, they're a default for the reasons they're put out. Just like a framework is set as a rigid. Okay, you need to change the things. That's how we set things initially to get things working, but then it needs to be customized. Just like you're not going to use default passwords for all of your information, for all your systems. You're not going to use default configurations for a cloud rollout. They're set to get you to that point for then you to tailor, guess what I'm going to say, to match your business. And you're going to go through that whole process. So it really is going through, and it's evolving, and you need to be continually looking at your program, whether that's your testing program, whether it's your program for KPIs, for goal setting, anything that you're doing, you need to constantly be evolving and allowing that shifting sand not to sink your business, but to move your business in the right direction.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, Chad, over the course of the past, 5, 6, 7 years, how many executives have we spoken to that are doing a cloud migration where they're saying, well, the cloud will take care of security now? I mean, it's really
It'll take care of it all right, just sometimes not in the right, the right
Absolutely
outcome.
right. Absolutely right. Doesn't it just protect everything? No, it doesn't protect everything. So those are good points. And speaking to the idea of organizational goals, I want to mention one codicil here. Something that I've noticed a lot in our business, and I've been, if I had a holy mission, it would be this: security doesn't accept risk, the business does. I'm surprised how many times I'm in meetings where they go, well, security needs to approve this exception, or security needs to approve this risk. And I say, I don't do that, guys. I don't know what you're talking about. I advise on risk. The business accepts the risk. And I've had some uncomfortable conversations with executive VPs where I'm like, I'm okay with you moving forward. In the past, I'm okay with you moving forward, but you got to sign your name on this piece of paper that says you accept this risk. They suddenly go, wait, what do you mean? I'm like, I don't control your resources. I don't control your people. I don't control your spend. I don't control your market. Why would I accept a risk that I can have no control over? That's a difficult conversation, but an important one to have. And it speaks to this idea of risk tolerances. If you look at the Cynefin framework I showed earlier in the presentation, we were talking about complex and things evolving. So when you're looking at rolling out a security program in the real world, using a trusted framework and best practices and stuff like that, you have to allow for the fact that not everyone is the same. To say this is going to be the way the world works going forward is to approach it from a very simplistic mind frame. In our product line right now, we have over 130 different products. They're not all going to be DevOps certified by tomorrow, no matter what edict I put out. I have to work with the business owners and help them understand where they are and where their gaps are. And then as a subject matter expert, my credibility and my trust is that I'm prioritizing things for them and helping them understand, as part of our shift left mentality, how they can get security related features or security related controls into their development and products and release process as early as possible. So there's an old saying, everybody's always fighting a fight you're not aware of. So different product lines, different people are fighting different types of stressors, and you have to be respectful of that, just like you are as well. They don't know what sort of challenges you as a security professional or a healthcare professional are facing. So you have to have some empathy here and understand that one size fits all is not going to be a successful strategy going forward at all.
Exactly. And I think the key to that is, as we kind of wrap up here, it all comes back together, right? It's having that communication, it's understanding, it's building trust, and I think more importantly, keeping that trust. And how do you keep trust? Keep doing what you did to create it, and just feed the communication, feed the interaction, and really, leverage the communication, leverage those relationships that you build.
Yep. Know what sort of people you're working with. Negotiate positive outcomes. Be aware of risk tolerances. Be seen as the person who this is the goal I was always shooting for in the past. We have this situation. That's nice. That's nice. Has somebody asked Phil? What does Phil think of this? That's the types of conversations I like to be in. Right. And I always approach them from the perspective of, hey guys, I'm happy to help. Let's talk. Let's figure this out. Because my role is to help move the business forward and help the executives achieve the goals and visions we're setting together, not to be a blocker or a hindrance to that. And it's all about relationships and establishing the right language and context to help the people you're working with work toward those shared outcomes and that shared vision.
Great stuff. Well, Phil, I want to thank you for your time. It was a fun conversation, and I hope that everyone learned a little bit about not only getting trust, but then keeping it.
You appreciate it. Thanks, Chad, very much. I'm going to get my helmet, see you out on the road later, okay?
Sounds great.
All right, take care.